The forgotten species the galaxy was dying, and the Galactic Concord knew it. For 3,000 years, 12 spacefaring civilizations had lived together in peace. They built great cities on 100 worlds. They traded goods across the stars. They believed they were safe. They were wrong. The Vorn came from the dark spaces between galaxies. No one knew where they truly originated. They were not a species in the normal sense. They were a swarm, a hunger, a living plague that consumed everything in its path. Their ships were not made of metal. They were alive, grown from the bodies of the species they devoured. The Vorn did not conquer worlds. They ate them. In 2 cycles, 17 star systems fell silent. Billions of lives vanished. The mighty fleets of the Concord fought back, but it was like trying to stop a flood with bare hands. Every battle ended the same way. The Concord retreated. The Vorn advanced. Hope faded like starlight in the void. High Chancellor Orath stood in the great chamber of Thesser Prime, the capital world of the Concord. He was a Valaxi, tall and insectoid, with 4 arms and compound eyes that had seen too much death. Around him sat the leaders of all 12 species. Fear hung in the air like smoke. "We cannot win this war," said Admiral Vess of the Tirani Federation. His blue scales were pale with exhaustion. "Our fleets are broken. Our armies are scattered. The Vorn will reach the inner systems within 3 cycles. Then we evacuate," said Minister Kala of the Merethi Dominion. She was small and feathered, her voice trembling. "We run. We hide. Perhaps some of us will survive. And go where?" Orath asked. "The Vorn do not stop. They do not rest. They will follow us to the edge of existence." Silence filled the chamber. No one had an answer. In the back of the room, an old Merethi scholar named Kelvin raised his hand. He was ancient, his feathers gray with age, his eyes still sharp. "There may be another way," he said. The leaders turned to look at him. Kelvin walked slowly to the center of the chamber, carrying a data tablet that looked older than most of the people in the room. "I have spent my life studying the ancient archives," he said. "The records from before the Concord was formed. I found something. A reference to a world that was quarantined long ago. A world called Earth." Minister Kala laughed bitterly. "Earth? That is a myth. A story told to frighten children. The humans died out thousands of years ago. Did they?" Kelvin asked. "The records say the quarantine was never lifted. The records say patrol stations still monitor the boundary. Why guard an empty grave?" High Chancellor Orath felt something cold move through his body. He remembered the old stories. Every species in the Concord had them. Tales of a small blue world on the edge of the galaxy. Tales of creatures that looked soft and weak but fought like cornered animals. Tales of a species so violent, so unpredictable, so terrifyingly persistent that the ancient Concord founders chose to lock them away rather than risk contact. "The humans were quarantined for good reason," Orath said slowly. "They were dangerous, unstable. They waged war against each other constantly. They adapted to any environment. They refused to surrender, even when defeat was certain. Our ancestors feared them." "Our ancestors were not facing extinction," Kelvin replied. The chamber erupted in argument. Some called the idea madness. Others called it desperation. But beneath all the shouting, one truth remained. They had no other options left. 3 days later, a Concord probe crossed the ancient quarantine boundary and entered the Sol system. Far away, on a world that the galaxy had forgotten, Captain Yuna stood on the bridge of the patrol ship Hanarium. She was 34 years old, with black hair cut short and eyes that had learned to see through darkness. She had served in the Earth Defense Force for 12 years. She had trained for a moment that everyone said would never come. Contact, said Lieutenant Taiho from his station. He was younger than Yuna, quick-minded and sharp-tongued, but his voice was steady. Single vessel, small, no weapon signature. It's broadcasting a signal. Yuna moved to stand beside him. What kind of signal? Old, very old. It's using a communication protocol that hasn't been active for 2,000 years. Taiho looked up at her. Captain, I think it's from the Concorde. Yuna felt her heart beat faster. Every human knew the history. 2,000 years ago, Earth had reached out to the stars. They had met other species. The contact had gone badly. The Concorde had declared humans too dangerous and sealed them behind a wall of patrol stations and warning beacons. Humanity had been trapped in its own solar system, watched like prisoners, forgotten like ghosts. But humans did not waste time feeling sorry for themselves. They built. They learned. They grew stronger. They watched the stars through telescopes and sensors, gathering information, waiting. They knew that someday the door would open again. What do we do? Taiho asked. Yuna thought for a long moment. Regulations said to destroy any unauthorized vessel that entered human space. But Yuna was not the kind of person who followed rules without thinking. She read the situation. A single probe, no weapons, using ancient codes. This was not an attack. This was a message. We respond, she said. Open a channel. The probe carried data. Yuna read it with Taiho and Ambassador June, a diplomat who had been assigned to their patrol group for exactly this kind of situation. June was calm and careful, a woman who chose her words like a surgeon chose tools. As they reviewed the information, her face grew pale. The Vorn, June said. I've heard rumors. Long-range sensors picked up something strange in the outer galaxy. Worlds going dark. Signals disappearing. This explains it. They're losing, Taiho said. The entire Concorde is losing. And they came to us. They came to beg, Yuna corrected. The same species that locked us in a cage are now asking us to save them. Ambassador June set down the data tablet. The question is simple. Do we help them? Yuna walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars. Somewhere beyond that darkness, billions of creatures were dying. The Concorde had treated humanity with fear and contempt. They had stolen 2,000 years from Earth. They had called humans monsters. But Yuna knew something the Concorde did not understand. Humans did not fight because they loved violence. They fought because they loved what violence threatened to destroy. Family, home, hope. It did not matter that the Concorde had been cruel. What mattered was that innocent lives were being lost. We helped them, Yuna said. Not because they deserve it. Because it's who we are. She turned to Taiho. Send the probe back with a message. Tell them we remember. Tell them we're coming. The probe returned to Concorde space, carrying words that would change the galaxy forever. High Chancellor Orath read the message alone in his chamber, his compound eyes wide with something he had not felt in months. Hope and fear. The message was simple. Just 2 lines. We remember you. We're coming to help. Orath set down the tablet and stared out at the stars. For 3,000 years, the Concorde had slept peacefully, believing the humans were safely locked away. Now the cage was opening. The forgotten species was returning. He whispered to himself in the darkness. What have we done? What have we awakened? Somewhere in the void, human ships began to move. The arrival to sky above Thesser Prime had never been so crowded. Thousands of Concorde ships hung in orbit, their hulls shining under the light of twin suns. Millions of people watched from the surface, their eyes turned upward, waiting for something they had only heard about in old stories. The humans were coming. High Chancellor Orath stood on the observation platform of the Grand Citadel. surrounded by military officers and diplomats. His 4 hands were clasped tightly behind his back. He had not slept in 3 days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the ancient warnings in the archives. The humans are persistent. The humans adapt. The humans do not know when to stop. Hyperspace signatures detected, announced the technician. Multiple contacts. They're emerging now. The sky rippled like water disturbed by stones. Points of light appeared, growing brighter, taking shape. Then the human fleet was there. Arth had expected something crude. The humans had been isolated for 2,000 years, after all. He expected rough ships, primitive weapons, desperate survivors crawling out of their prison. He was wrong. The human vessels were smaller than Concorde ships, but they moved with a grace that made his officers gasp. They did not drift into formation slowly and carefully like Concorde fleets did. They snapped into position, fast and precise, like predators surrounding prey. Their hulls were dark, almost invisible against the stars. No running lights. No identification beacons. No constant chatter on communication channels. They were silent. They were watching. By the ancestors, whispered Admiral Vess. They're not broadcasting anything. How do they coordinate without open channels? Tight beam communication, said one of the human observers who had arrived earlier to prepare for the meeting. We talk only to each other. No one else needs to hear. Vess stared at the human with something close to horror. In Concorde space, all military communication was broadcast openly. It was considered honorable, fair. The idea of hiding your words from your enemy was almost unthinkable. But humans, Arth realized, did not think about war the same way. The largest human ship moved forward from the formation. It was called the Magungwa, and it carried Fleet Commander Do-Yin, the leader of the human expeditionary force. Arth had read the file on Do-Yin. The man was 60 years old. He had fought in 3 major conflicts on Earth before the unification. He had seen more war than most Concorde officers could imagine. A shuttle launched from the Magungwa and descended toward the Grand Citadel. Oreth went to meet it. The shuttle doors opened, and Ambassador June stepped out first. She was younger than Oreth expected, with a calm face and steady eyes. Behind her came Captain Yuna, Lieutenant Taiho, and a dozen human guards. The guards wore armor that seemed too thin, carried weapons that seemed too simple. But they moved like water flowing around rocks, smooth and aware and ready. Aura spread his 4 arms in the traditional Concorde greeting. Welcome to Vesser Prime. I am High Chancellor Oreth. On behalf of the Galactic Concorde, I thank you for answering our call. Ambassador June bowed slightly. Thank you for receiving us. I am Ambassador June. This is Captain Yuna and Lieutenant Taiho. Fleet Commander Do-Yun sends his regards and will join us shortly. They walked together into the Grand Citadel, surrounded by guards from both species. Arth noticed how the Concorde guards kept glancing at the humans nervously. The humans did not glance at anyone. They watched everything at once, their eyes never stopping, their bodies never fully relaxed. The meeting room was vast and beautiful, filled with art and light. Leaders from all 12 Concorde species waited inside. June looked at each of them carefully, reading faces, measuring reactions. Taiho stayed close to Yuna, his hand resting casually near his sidearm. Let us speak plainly, Oreth said once everyone was seated. The Vorn are destroying us. Our fleets cannot stop them. Our worlds are falling. We have called upon humanity because we have no other choice. June nodded. We understand. We have been watching the Vorn advance from our sensors for some time. We know what they are. We know what they do. You watched? Minister Kala asked, her feathers rising with anger. You watched our people die and did nothing. We were quarantined, June replied, her voice still calm. Your ancestors made sure we could not leave our system. We watched because watching was all we could do. Silence fell over the room. Kala looked away, ashamed. That was long ago, Orth said carefully. A different time. Different leaders. Different leaders who feared us, June said. Who called us monsters. Who locked us away because they could not control us. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. We could hold anger for that. Many humans do. But we did not come here to settle old debts. We came because innocent people are dying, and we can help. Captain Yuna spoke for the first time. Show us the battlefield reports. Show us how the Vorn fight. Admiral Vess activated a holographic display. Images filled the air. Vorn ships, twisted and organic, swarming over Concord fleets. Ground footage of Vorn creatures pouring across cities like living floods. Soldiers firing weapons that seemed to do nothing. Retreat after retreat after retreat. Lieutenant Taiho watched with narrow eyes. His expression did not change, but Yuna saw his jaw tighten. When the display ended, he turned to Admiral Vess. Your tactics are wrong, Taiho said simply. Vess bristled. Excuse me? You fight defensively. You establish lines and try to hold them. When pressure builds, you retreat to the next line. That does not work against an enemy that does not stop. Taiho gestured at the display. The Vorn are not an army. They are a flood. You cannot build walls against a flood. You must redirect it. Break it apart. Attack the source. Attack? Vess laughed bitterly. We have tried attacking. We lose ships faster than we can build them. You lose ships because you attack the way you defend, Yuna said. Carefully, honorably, with formations and rules. She shook her head. Humans do not fight that way. High Chancellor Orth leaned forward. Then how do humans fight? Before Yuna could answer, the doors opened. Fleet Commander Dohin walked in. He was older than the others, his hair gray, his face lined with years. But he moved like a younger man, steady and strong. His eyes swept the room once, taking in everything, and then he smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had seen the worst of what war could bring and had decided to keep going anyway. High Chancellor, Dohin said. I apologize for my late arrival. I was reviewing your defensive positions. He paused. You've already lost this war, you know. The way you're fighting, the Vorn will reach this world within 2 cycles. The room erupted. Concord leaders shouted in anger and fear. Dohin stood calmly in the center of it all, waiting for silence. But he continued when the noise faded. You have not lost yet. You called us for help. We are here. And humans do not know how to lose. He walked to the holographic display and pointed at a world on the edge of Concord space. Tessith 4, agricultural world. 3 million civilians. The Vorn will hit it in 12 days. Your strategists have already written it off. We cannot defend everywhere, Admiral Vess protested. You cannot, Dalian agreed. We can. My fleet will go to Tessith 4. We will show you how humans fight. He looked at Orth with eyes that had seen too much death to be afraid of anything. And then you will understand why your ancestors were right to fear us. The meeting ended. As the leaders filed out, June caught Orth's arm. The High Chancellor looked down at her, his compound eyes unreadable. I know you are afraid of us, June said quietly. I know the stories your people tell. But understand this. We are not your enemies. We never were. We are simply what happens when you back a species into a corner and give them 2,000 years to prepare. She released his arm and walked away, leaving Orth alone with his thoughts and his fears. The human fleet departed for Tessith 4 that night, vanishing into hyperspace like ghosts fading into darkness. The galaxy watched and waited. The myths were about to become real. First contact with the enemy Tessus 4 was a beautiful world. Rolling green hills stretched beneath purple skies. Silver rivers cut through fields of grain that fed a dozen Concord systems. 3 million Merithi lived in small towns and farming villages. Peaceful people who had never seen war. Now war was coming to them. Sergeant Minji stood at the edge of the landing zone, watching human dropships settle onto the grass like metal birds. She was 30 years old, compact and strong, with scars on her hands from fights she did not talk about. She had grown up in the mountains of Korea, in a village that still remembered the old ways of hardship and survival. The military had given her purpose. The stars had given her a mission. "Beautiful place," said Private Hyunwoo, stepping up beside her. He was big and broad, carrying a heavy weapon that most soldiers needed 2 hands to lift. He carried it with one. Despite his size, he smiled easily and laughed often. Minji liked him. "It won't be beautiful for long," she replied. Corporal Jisoo joined them, her medical kit strapped to her back. She was the youngest in the squad, 22 years old, with gentle eyes that had seen their first death only 6 months ago. She was still learning that being a healer in war meant watching people die no matter how hard you tried. "The civilians are scared," Jisoo said. "The Merithi children keep hiding when they see us. I think they believe the old stories." Minji nodded. She had heard the stories too. In Concord myths, humans were monsters. Demons from a cursed world. Creatures that killed without mercy and never stopped hunting. It was strange to be feared by people she had come to save. "They'll learn," Minji said. "One way or another." In orbit, Captain Yuna stood on the bridge of the Narration, watching the tactical display. The Concord observers who had come along were huddled in a corner, speaking in hushed voices. They kept looking at the human crew with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Vorn fleet inbound," Lieutenant Taiho reported. 3,000 ships. Maybe more. "They'll be here in 4 hours. Composition?" Yuna asked. "Mostly swarm ships. Small, fast, organic. A few larger vessels that seem to serve as command nodes." Taiho paused. "Captain, this is 3 times the force that destroyed the Concord defense at Kalvar. Are you sure about this?" Yuna smiled slightly. "Commander Dian is sure. That's enough for me." From the flagship Maganwa, Dahyung's voice came over the command channel. "All ships, this is Fleet Commander. Assume attack formation Delta 7. Do not wait for them to come to us. We meet them at the system's edge." The Concord observers gasped. One of them, a young Tarani officer named Vestal, stepped forward. "You're advancing? Into that swarm? That's suicide." Yuna glanced at him. "It would be suicide for you. Your ships fight in defensive clusters. You wait for the enemy to reach you, then try to hold ground." She turned back to the display. "We don't wait. We don't hold ground. We attack. We break through. We attack again. The Vorn have never faced anything like us." The human fleet moved out, engines burning hot, racing toward the edge of the system where the Vorn would emerge from hyperspace. 200 ships against 3,000. The math looked impossible, but humans had never been good at math. The Vorn arrived in a wave of twisted metal and living flesh. Their ships screamed across space, hungry and mindless, drawn by the scent of prey. They expected the same thing they always found: frightened defenders. Easy meat thought they found the humans instead. Dahyun gave one order: break them. The human fleet scattered like seeds in wind, each ship moving independently, following patterns that seemed random but were perfectly coordinated. They did not form lines or walls. They flowed through the Vorn swarm like water through rocks, firing from every direction at once. Vorn ships exploded. Then more, then more. The swarm tried to surround the human vessels, but the humans never stayed still long enough. They struck and moved, a dance of death that the Vorn could not follow. On the Honorarium, Una commanded her ship through the chaos. A Vorn cruiser loomed ahead, twice the size of her vessel. Taiho's hands flew across his console. "It's charging weapons," he said. "We should pull back." "No." Una's voice was calm. "Increase speed. Target their propulsion system. All forward guns." The Honorarium surged forward, closing the distance instead of retreating. The Vorn ship fired, but the shot passed through empty space where the Honorarium should have been. Una's ship was already inside its guard. Too close for the big guns to track. Human weapons tore through the Vorn cruiser's engines. The creature ship screamed, a sound that echoed across radio frequencies, and then it was falling, crippled and burning. On the surface of Tessith 4, Sergeant Minji heard the distant thunder of orbital battle. She had no time to watch. The Vorn had sent ground forces ahead of the main fleet, biological pods that fell from the sky, like seeds of destruction. The first pod hit a field 3 kilometers from the main evacuation point. Minji watched through binoculars as it cracked open and Vorn creatures spilled out. They were nightmares made flesh. 6 legs, eyeless heads, mouths full of teeth that could bite through armor. They moved fast, faster than anything that Psi should move. "Contact," Minji said calmly into her radio. "Vorn ground forces. All units, defensive positions." The human soldiers spread out, taking cover behind walls and vehicles. The Marathi civilians behind them screamed and cried, pressing together like frightened animals. Minji heard their terror, but she could not comfort them now. She had a job to do. The Vorn charged. They crossed open ground in seconds, a tide of claws and hunger. Concord soldiers would have fired a few shots and fallen back. Concord tactics said you could not hold against a swarm charge. Humans were not Concord. "Fire," Minji ordered. The human line erupted. Bullets and plasma tore through the air, cutting down Vorn by the dozens. Private Humu stood at the center, his heavy weapon roaring, mowing down creatures like grain before a scythe. He was laughing, a wild sound that mixed with the thunder of his gun. The Vorn kept coming. They crawled over their own dead, driven by hunger that knew no fear. Some reached the human line. Minji shot one in the face, then smashed another with the butt of her rifle. Beside her, a soldier went down, claws tearing through his armor. Corporal Jisoo was there in seconds, dragging him back, pressing bandages to wounds that were too deep. "Hold the line," Minji shouted. "They do not pass. Do you hear me? They do not pass." The humans held. They held when the Vorn numbers seemed endless. They held when ammunition ran low and soldiers fought with knives and fists. They held because holding was what humans did. Behind the line, a young Marathi girl watched with wide eyes. She had heard the stories about humans. Monsters, her parents said. Demons. But the monsters were fighting the demons, bleeding and dying to protect people they had never met. The girl's mother pulled her close, whispering prayers to ancient gods. But the girl kept watching the human soldiers, and she was not afraid of them anymore. In orbit, the battle reached its peak. The Vorn swarm was breaking apart, confused by tactics they had never encountered. Human ships that should have retreated pressed forward instead. Damaged vessels that should have fled rammed themselves into larger enemies. The humans fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to protect. Commander Dohin watched from the Magongwa, his face calm. "Target the command node," he ordered. "All ships, converge on Sector 7. The humans struck together, a concentrated blow aimed at the largest Vorn vessel. It was the brain of the swarm, the node that coordinated the mindless creatures. Without it, the Vorn would fall into chaos. The node tried to flee. It was too slow. Human ships surrounded it, pouring fire into its organic hull until it split apart and died. The effect was immediate. Vorn ships began to drift, their coordination gone. They turned on each other, attacking blindly, confused. The swarm that had terrorized 17 systems was breaking apart. "All ships," Doyen said quietly. "Finish them." On the ground, Sergeant Minji felt the change. The Vorn creatures hesitated, their movements becoming jerky and uncertain. She did not understand why, but she did not need to. She knew an opportunity when she saw it. "Push them back," she roared. "Now! Push them back!" The humans advanced, driving the Vorn away from the evacuation point, cutting them down without mercy. The creatures that had terrorized the galaxy fled before soldiers from a forgotten world. By nightfall, Tessith 4 was saved. The Vorn were gone, their fleet destroyed, their ground forces scattered and dying. 3 million Merethi civilians were alive because humans had come to fight for them. Sergeant Minji sat on a broken wall, watching medics carry the wounded away. Corporal Jisoo slumped beside her, exhausted, blood on her hands that was not her own. Private Hyungwoo was nearby, cleaning his weapon and humming a song from home. A small Merathi girl approached him, the same one who had watched the battle. She stood in front of Minji, trembling but brave. "Are you really the monsters from the old stories?" she asked in a small voice. Minji looked at her for a long moment. Then she knelt down, bringing her eyes level with the child's. "We're not monsters," she said gently. "We're just very good at fighting them." The girl nodded slowly. Then, to Minji's surprise, she stepped forward and hugged her. Minji froze. Then, carefully, she hugged the child back. Across the Concord, news of Tessith 4 spread like wildfire. The humans had done the impossible. They had broken the Vorn, and for the first time in 2 cycles, people began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could survive. In his chamber on Thesser Prime, High Chancellor Roth watched the battle recordings with trembling hands. The humans fought like nothing he had ever seen. They were terrifying. They were magnificent. They were everything the old myths had warned about. And they were on his side. "Ancestors, forgive us," he whispered. "What have we awakened?" The weight of myth, the victory at Tessith 4, changed everything. News spread across the Concord faster than starlight. Footage of the battle was shared on every network, watched by billions of eyes. They saw human ships dancing through Vorn swarms, striking without mercy, refusing to retreat. They saw human soldiers holding the line against creatures that had slaughtered entire armies. They saw the impossible made real. Some celebrated. Finally, hope. Finally, a weapon against the darkness. Crowds gathered in cities across Concord space, chanting words they did not fully understand. Humans. Humans. Others were afraid. They watched the same footage and saw something different. They saw a species that fought without hesitation, without restraint, without the careful rules that civilized people followed. They saw predators. They remembered the old myths. On Thesser Prime, Scholar Yuri walked through the ancient archives, her footsteps echoing in dusty halls that few people visited anymore. She was a historian, assigned by the human government to study the Concord records. She wanted to understand why humanity had been quarantined. The official story said humans were too aggressive, too violent. But Yuri had learned long ago that official stories were rarely complete. The archive keeper, an elderly Merethi named Soleth, followed her through the stacks. Soleth was a religious leader, a guardian of old knowledge. She had spent her life studying the myths and legends of her people. Now she found herself guiding a creature from those very legends. "Here," Soleth said, stopping before a sealed vault. "The original records from first contact. No one has opened this in 1,000 years." Yuri placed her hand on the scanner. The vault door opened with a hiss of ancient air. Inside, data crystals glowed with pale light, holding memories older than nations. Yuri began to read. Hours passed. The truth emerged slowly, piece by piece. The first contact between humans and the Concorde had happened 3,000 years ago. A Concorde scout ship had entered the Sol system, curious about the signals coming from the third planet. They found a species in the middle of a global war, millions of beings killing each other over land and resources and ideas. The scouts watched in horror. They had never seen anything like it. Concorde species fought sometimes, yes, but their wars were limited, controlled, governed by strict rules. Humans fought total wars. They bombed cities. They starved populations. They developed weapons specifically designed to kill as many people as possible. But that was not the worst part. The scouts stayed hidden and watched longer. They saw the wars end. They saw humans rebuild, faster than should have been possible. They saw enemies become allies, hatred transform into cooperation. They saw a species that could tear itself apart and then put itself back together, stronger than before. The Concorde Council received the scout report and panicked. Here was a species that combined the worst violence with incredible resilience. A species that learned from every conflict, that adapted to every challenge, that simply refused to stay down. A species that, given enough time, would spread across the stars and reshape the galaxy in its image. The quarantine was not punishment. It was fear. They didn't lock us away because we were weak, Yuri said quietly, setting down the data crystal. They locked us away because we were strong, because they looked at us and saw what we could become. Solith was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. The myths call your kind the nightmare species, the ones who do not stop. I always thought it was exaggeration. Now I wonder if it was understatement. Yuri smiled sadly. We are what survival made us. 100,000 years of fighting everything. The cold, the heat, the animals, each other. We adapted because the alternative was extinction. She looked at Solith with eyes that held ancient weight. We have spent 2,000 years trying to be better, to channel our violence into protection instead of destruction. But we haven't forgotten what we are. We can't afford to forget. On another part of Thesser Prime, General Sunho met with the combined military leadership of the Concorde. He was an older man, lean and weathered, with the patient eyes of someone who had learned that wars were won through planning, not passion. Behind him stood Captain Yuna and Lieutenant Taiho, newly promoted after Tessith 4. The Vorn are regrouping, Sunho said, gesturing at the holographic display. They lost a significant force at Tessith, but their main swarm is still intact. They're gathering for a major offensive. Admiral Vest studied the display with his blue scales pale. Where will they strike? Here, Sunho pointed at the center of the map. Thesser Prime, your capital, your heart. They're coming for the killing blow. The Concorde leaders erupted in panic. Sunho waited for silence, then continued. We have two options. First, we evacuate the government to a secondary location and try to hold the Vorn at the outer systems. This buys time, but it means surrendering your capital. Your people will lose hope. The war will be lost slowly instead of quickly. And the second option? High Chancellor Orath asked. We stand and fight. Here. Now. Every ship, every soldier, every resource we have. We make Thesser Prime into a fortress, and we break the Vorn against it. That's madness, said Minister Kala. If we lose that battle, we lose everything. If we run, Sunho replied calmly, we lose everything anyway, just more slowly. He looked at each leader in turn. I have studied your species. I have read your histories. You are not cowards. Your ancestors built this Concorde through courage and sacrifice. Honor them stand, and fight. The debate lasted hours. In the end, they chose to fight. Outside the war room, Sergeant Minji sat with her squad in a temporary camp. The sun was setting over Thesser Prime, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was beautiful. She tried to remember the last time she had simply enjoyed a sunset. Corporal Jizu sat beside her, writing a letter home. Yunwu was nearby, arm wrestling with a group of Tyranny soldiers who had become fascinated by human strength. He was letting them win sometimes, teaching them tricks, laughing with them like old friends. Strange, isn't it? Jizu said quietly. A week ago, they were afraid of us. Now they want to learn from us. Fear and respect are not so different, Minji replied. They feared what we could do to them. Now they see what we can do for them. The feeling changes. An elderly Marathi approached their camp. Minji recognized her. Soleth, the archive keeper. She walked slowly, leaning on a staff, but her eyes were sharp and curious. May I sit with you? Soleth asked. Minji gestured to an empty spot. Soleth settled down with a sigh, her old bones creaking. For a while, she simply watched the humans. Watched Hyunwoo laugh with aliens. Watched Jisu's gentle smile as she wrote about home. Watched Minji's steady gaze sweeping the horizon, always alert, always ready. I have studied the myths about your kind my entire life, Soleth said finally. The stories say you are creatures of endless war. That violence lives in your bones. That you destroy everything you touch. She paused. But I have watched you these past days. I see soldiers who fight like demons, yes. But I also see them play music and cook food and comfort crying children. I see them laugh even when they are hurt. I see them carry our wounded as gently as they carry their own. Minji was quiet for a moment. We are all of those things, she said. The violence and the gentleness. The destruction and the creation. Humans have always been complicated. We contain contradictions. How do you bear it? Soleth asked. The weight of so much darkness inside you? Minji thought about the question seriously. She thought about the wars of Earth's past, the horrors that humans had inflicted on each other. She thought about the 2,000 years of isolation, trapped in their own system, wondering if anyone would ever give them a second chance. She thought about her squad, her friends, the people she would die to protect. We carry the darkness because someone has to, Minji said finally. We learned long ago that pretending the darkness doesn't exist doesn't make it go away. It just makes you unprepared when it comes. So we accept what we are. We train ourselves to use the violence when it's needed and set it aside when it's not. It's not easy. It's not always clean. But it's how we survive. Soleth nodded slowly. The myths were wrong about you. Were they? They called you monsters. But monsters don't sit quietly watching sunsets. Monsters don't teach foreign soldiers how to arm wrestle. Monsters don't cry when their friends die. Soleth looked at her with new understanding. You're not monsters. You're guardians. Guardians who happen to be very, very dangerous. Hyunwoo wandered over, grinning. 3 Tyranny soldiers following him like enthusiastic students. Sergeant. These guys want to learn that throw I used during the battle. The one that broke the Vorn's neck. Is it okay if I teach them? Minji almost smiled. Go ahead. Just don't break any of them. I'll be gentle. Hyunwoo promised, leading his new friends away. Soleth watched him go. He just killed dozens of creatures. Now he's playing like a child. That's the secret, Minji said. If you can't find joy after the darkness wins. Humans learned that lesson the hard way. Many times. We hold on to the light because the alternative is becoming the very thing we fight against. Night fell over Thesser Prime, in camps and ships across the system. Humans and Concord species sat together, sharing food and stories. The old fear was not gone, not completely, but something new was growing alongside it. Trust, respect, maybe even friendship. In his chamber, High Chancellor Oroth received the latest intelligence reports. The Vorn were coming, the largest swarm ever recorded. In 2 weeks, they would arrive at Desert Prime. The final battle was approaching. He thought about the humans, about their terrifying effectiveness and their strange kindness, about myths that were both true and false at the same time. General Sunho's words echoed in his mind. Honor your ancestors. Stand and fight. Oroth made his decision. He activated the communication system and spoke to the entire Concord. Citizens of the Concord, he said, the enemy is coming. They believe we are weak. They believe we will run. They are wrong. 2 weeks from now, the Vorn will arrive at our capital, and they will find us waiting. Not just the Concord, not just our old allies, but our new ones as well. The humans have shown us how to fight. Now we will show them that we are worthy to stand beside them. We will hold the line. We will protect our home. And we will win. Across the galaxy, billions of beings heard his words and felt something stir in their hearts. Hope, determination, courage. The countdown to the final battle had begun. The last stand, the sky above Desert Prime, was filled with ships. Thousands of vessels hung in orbit, more than had ever gathered in one place in the history of the galaxy. Concord warships from all 12 species formed great walls of metal and light, and among them, moving like shadows, were the human fleet. Commander Do-hyun stood on the bridge of the Mugunhwa, looking at the tactical display. He was 62 years old. He had fought his first battle at 19. He had seen friends die in conflicts that history had already forgotten. He had never expected to die of old age, and he had made peace with that long ago. Fleet status? He asked. All ships report ready. Captain Yuna answered from the Narration. Human and Concord forces are in position. We're as ready as we'll ever be. Dawn nodded. He opened a channel to the entire fleet, human and Concord alike. This is Fleet Commander Do-hyun. In a few hours, the Vorn will arrive. They're bringing everything they have. They believe this will be the end of the Concord. The end of hope? He paused. They're wrong. He thought about his granddaughter back on Earth, about the cherry blossoms in Seoul, about all the small, beautiful things that existed because people were willing to fight for them. We fight not because victory is certain, he continued. We fight because surrender is not an option. That's what being human means. And today, it's what being part of this Concord means. We stand together. We fight together. And whatever happens, we face it together. The channel hummed with voices. Human commanders calling out ready. Concord captains echoing the word. A single moment of unity across species that had feared and distrusted each other for millennia. Then the Vorn arrived. They came out of hyperspace like a wound opening in reality. Tens of thousands of ships, twisted and organic, screaming across every frequency. The largest swarm ever recorded. Behind the ships came the hive vessels, great living mountains that served as factories and command centers. The Vorn had gathered everything. This was their final push. All ships, Do-hyun said calmly, engage. The battle began. Human ships struck first, racing forward in their unpredictable patterns, tearing holes in the Vorn formation. Concord vessels followed, larger and slower, but fighting with new aggression learned from their human allies. The void filled with fire and death. On the Narration, Yuna commanded her crew through the chaos. Lieutenant Taiho worked beside her, coordinating with ships across the fleet, weaving human tactics with Concord firepower. Command node at Sector 12, Taiho reported. If we take it out, this entire flank will collapse. Can we reach it? Yuna asked. It's deep in their formation. We'll take heavy damage. Yuna looked at her crew. Young faces, determined eyes. They had come from a forgotten world to fight for people who had feared them. They knew the risks. They didn't flinch. Take us in, she ordered. The Hanarium dove into the Vorn swarm. On the surface of Thesser Prime, Sergeant Minji crouched behind a barrier, watching the sky burn. Debris from the orbital battle was falling like flaming rain. Somewhere up there, the fate of the galaxy was being decided. Down here, she had a different job. The Vorn had landed ground forces. Thousands of drop pods had punched through the orbital defenses, spilling creatures into the capital city. Minji's squad held a bridge that led to the central evacuation point. If the Vorn crossed it, millions of civilians would die. Here they come, Yunu said, settling into position with his heavy weapon. Lots of them this time, aren't there always? Jishu muttered, checking her medical supplies. She had already treated a dozen wounded today. There would be more. The Vorn charged. A wave of claws and teeth and hunger, pouring across the open ground toward the bridge. Behind them came larger creatures, evolved specifically for breaching fortifications. Fire! Minji ordered. The human line erupted. Beside them, Concord soldiers fought with weapons they had learned to use in the weeks of preparation. Torani marksmen picked off Vorn climbers. Mirthi engineers detonated charges that collapsed buildings onto advancing swarms. Galaxy warriors, massive and forearmed, held the flanks with brutal efficiency, but it was not enough. The Vorn kept coming. They crawled over their dead, endless, relentless. One of the large breaching creatures reached the barricade and began tearing it apart. Minji emptied her rifle into its face. It barely slowed. Fall back to secondary positions. She shouted dot. They retreated, step by step, fighting for every meter. Behind them, the civilians huddled in shelters, praying to gods they hoped were listening. In orbit, the tide was turning. The combined fleet had destroyed hundreds of Vorn ships, but hundreds more remained. Casualties were mounting. The Concorde was learning to fight like humans, but they were still outmatched. On the Mugunghwa, Doyun studied the battle with experienced eyes. He saw what others missed. The Vorn had a central command ship, larger than anything else in their fleet. A hive mind given physical form. If it died, the swarm would shatter, but it was protected by thousands of vessels. No conventional attack could reach it. Taiho, Diane said over the command channel. I'm transferring fleet command to you. There was a pause. Then Yuna's voice, sharp with alarm. Sir, the command ship is the key. I'm taking the Mugunghwa through their center. I'll need every ship to cover my approach. That's a suicide run, Yuna said. It's the only way. Dohin's voice was calm. He had made his peace long ago. You'll command what comes after, Yuna. That's not a request. That's an order. The Mugunghwa began to move, accelerating toward the heart of the Vorn fleet. Human and Concorde ships formed around it, creating a corridor of fire through the enemy formation. Ships died. Crews sacrificed themselves to protect the flagship. The corridor held. The Vorn command ship loomed ahead, a living mountain of flesh and metal. Dohin looked at it without fear. He thought of his granddaughter again, of cherry blossoms, of a world that would continue because he chose to act. This is Fleet Commander Dohin. He broadcast to the entire fleet. It has been an honor to fight beside you. All of you. Finish what we started. The Mugunghwa struck the command ship at full speed. Its reactor detonated on impact, consuming both vessels in a sphere of white light. Across the Vorn fleet, ships went silent. The hive mind that coordinated them was gone. Tens of thousands of creatures suddenly found themselves alone, confused, unable to act. They turned on each other. They fled. They died. All ships, Una said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Press the attack. And this. The combined fleet surged forward, destroying the scattered Vorn with brutal efficiency. Within an hour, the largest swarm in galactic history had been reduced to floating wreckage. On the surface, the Vorn ground forces felt the death of the hive mind. They stopped mid-charge, their movements becoming jerky and random. Minji saw the change and did not hesitate. Now, she screamed. Push them back. The defenders charged. Human and Concord soldiers fought side by side, driving the confused Vorn away from the bridge, away from the civilians, away from everything they had tried to destroy. By nightfall, Desser Prime was saved. The celebration lasted for days. Across the Concord, people danced in streets and wept with joy. The Vorn were broken. Their home systems were already being targeted for counterattack. The war was not over, but the end was in sight. On Desser Prime, High Chancellor Arth stood before a gathering of billions, broadcast across the galaxy. Beside him stood Captain Una, newly promoted to commander. Behind them, human and Concord soldiers stood together. Today, we honor those who gave everything, Arth said. Fleet Commander Doyen, the thousands of humans and Concord soldiers who died defending our home. They will never be forgotten. He turned to face Una. For 3,000 years, your people were prisoners. We feared you. We called you monsters. We were wrong. He reached out with all four arms in the deepest gesture of respect his species knew. Today, I formally lift the ancient quarantine. The humans are no longer prisoners. They are allies. Our friends. Our protectors. The crowd erupted in cheers. Una stepped forward to speak. She looked out at the faces, alien and strange, yet somehow familiar now. She thought about everything that had brought them here. The fear, the isolation, the chance to prove what humanity could be. We didn't come here for gratitude, she said. We didn't come for revenge or recognition. We came because innocent people were dying and we could help. She paused. We have spent 2,000 years wondering what kind of species we would become. Whether we would let the darkness in our history define us or use it to protect others. Today, I think we have our answer. She looked at the sky, where stars were beginning to appear. The myths called us monsters. Maybe we are. But we are monsters who choose what we fight for. And we choose to fight for you. Not because you deserve it, but because that's who we are. Later, as the crowds dispersed and the celebrations continued, Sergeant Minji sat on a hillside overlooking the city. Jisoo leaned against her shoulder, exhausted but alive. Hyunwoo hummed a song from home, his heavy weapon finally silent. Elder Solith climbed the hill to join them. She settled down on the grass with a weary sigh. The myths were wrong about you, she said softly. Minji smiled. You said that before. I'll keep saying it. Soleth looked at the stars. The myths called you the nightmare species. I think they were simply afraid of what they couldn't understand. Minji followed her gaze upward. Somewhere out there was Earth, home, a small blue world that had been forgotten by the galaxy. Not anymore. Most people are afraid of what they don't understand, Minji said. But we're here now, and we're not going anywhere. The stars glittered above them, no longer cold and distant, but full of promise. The galaxy had changed. Humanity had emerged from the shadows, not as monsters, but as guardians. And somewhere in the void, the Vorn retreated, fleeing from something they had never expected to find. A species that did not know how to give up. A species called human.